Tonight, Parliament prepares to return after 5 months.
We are going to be very, very busy in the next few weeks.
The big priorities on a tight schedule. A new session without the Conservative leader.
We now have every duty to fulfill that hope and fight for that change.
And what to expect from a rare royal visit. A small Ontario community mourns 4 teenage students and their teacher.
It's a horrible situation and it's been difficult.
The devastating crash and poignant tribute. A BC man is going public after his credit score was suddenly reset to 0.
Well, I was just stunned. I was like, what do you mean I don't have a credit?
The little-known rule allowing a credit bureau to wipe your rating with no warning.
From CBC News, this is The National with Ian Hennemensing.
Ottawa's gearing up for a big couple of days. Tomorrow, Parliament is resuming for the first time this year since it was prorogued, then fiercely fought for in the federal election. And to open it, King Charles is coming to Canada. He'll land Monday afternoon for a 2-day visit and become just the second sitting monarch to open Parliament here. Ahead of that, today, both the Liberal and Conservative caucuses met to lay out their priorities for the weeks ahead. But with Parliament scheduled to go on a summer break in about a month, Olivia Stefanovic takes us through how Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre are positioning their parties and priorities.
On the eve of Parliament's return, the Prime Minister rallying his caucus for a short sitting with big plans.
I don't have to ask whether this room is ready. I know this room is ready.
Over the next few weeks, before Parliament rises for the summer break, Mark Carney says he wants to push through generational change.
It's my solemn commitment to work with all of you to seize this moment for Canadians.
With plans to push through several key pieces of legislation, including a middle-class tax cut, eliminating federal barriers to internal free trade, and making bail tougher to get. The priorities to be laid out in Tuesday's throne speech, delivered by none other than King Charles in a rare move.
Come on in! Let's get excited! Game on!
The Conservatives will return to Parliament without leader Pierre Poilievre, who lost his seat in the election. He says the party is willing to work with the Liberals.
We all want a permanent end to tariffs with the U.S., and we will work with the government to help make that happen. I've already told the Prime Minister that we are happy to cooperate any way we can.
But he's also offering a challenge.
We also need to focus on making our own economy more independent and self-reliant.
Calling for the removal of resource development restrictions and for the government to present a spring budget.
We want to work this summer if we have to do it. This is totally unacceptable to have to wait in October to address a budget.
The Liberals, 3 seats shy of a majority, recognizing they will need to cooperate with other parties to get things done.
We believe very, very clearly that Canadians have given us a mandate, and I think it will be incumbent on all parties to respond to that mandate, to read very clearly that mandate. Canadians expect action, they expect results, and that's what we intend to give them.
At their meeting, the Liberals voted against a mechanism that could have given them the power to trigger a leadership review down the line. It's called the Reform Act, and the Conservatives regularly adopt this piece of legislation. Some Liberals wanted to avoid a repeat of what happened with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, but in the end, they didn't adopt it, Ian.
And tomorrow, the first order of business will be electing a speaker.
That's right, and 8 MPs have let their name stand for this election. Now, the Speaker doesn't vote on legislation except if there's a tie. So since the Liberals are just 3 seats shy of a majority, they may want to back a Speaker from the opposition, Ian, but they might not. There are 2 Conservatives and 6 Liberals who are in the running.
All right, Olivia Stefanovic in Ottawa. As we mentioned, King Charles and Queen Camilla will be landing in Ottawa tomorrow for a 2-day visit, and Adrian will be hosting special live coverage of day 1 from Ottawa. Walk us through what's expected to happen, Adrian.
Hey there, Ian. I would say expect a lot of people to be parsing every word, every interaction, because this visit, Charles's 20th visit to Canada, is really short. It will be sending signals at every step. So we're expecting the King and Queen to arrive at the Ottawa airport at around 1 p.m. He will then be greeted by the Prime Minister and Governor General, and then spend the rest of the day effectively connecting with Canadians. Tuesday is when we start talking about history. Extremely rare for a sitting monarch to open Canadian Parliament with a throne speech. Decades and decades since we've seen this happen. And kids are going to be learning about this visit in particular in school for years.
A rare moment, Adrian, and no coincidence that it's happening now.
Oh, no, no coincidences here at all. It's not the King's idea, by the way. For this to happen, there has to be an invitation from the Prime Minister, and Mark Carney has made it very clear that this is a moment in time where Canada asserting all that makes it distinct is critical. This speech is certainly part of that, and make no mistake, the White House will be taking note of what happens here. The text of the speech, Ian, is all about the government's priorities, so don't expect to hear the King's opinions in it. That is not how this works, but it's just the reality that the speech will sound different when the King delivers it, and just the act of him saying the words will look and feel like a show of support for Canada and its sovereignty, which is, of course, the whole point of this.
All right, Adrian, thank you. There's a lot of ceremony built into every speech from the throne, whether or not a monarch is present. Three knocks on the House of Commons door, carried out by the usher of the Black Rod. There'll be a lot of symbolic acts on display Tuesday, a primer on why they exist and the history they're rooted in about 20 minutes. The town of Walkerton, Ontario came together tonight to remember the lives of 4 teenage girls and their high school teacher, all lost in a horrifying accident Friday. Lisa Shing is in the community with the latest on the identity of the victims and the void they leave behind.
A small community grappling with grief.
It's a horrible situation and it's been difficult.
At this intersection Friday afternoon near London, Ontario, 5 people were killed in a crash. 4 teenage girls, 16 and 17 years old, including Rowan McLeod and Cadence Ford, and their coach and teacher, 33-year-old Matt Eckert.
I first heard it from my father.
Fellow students say they made an impression. Keegan Padfield knew some of the girls from school sports.
They're all really kind, and when I first started out in grade 9, they were all really supportive and helping everybody improve.
The 5 were driving home to Walkerton from a softball tournament when their SUV collided with a transport truck, then hit another SUV. Police are still investigating the cause.
It was a very chaotic scene. And it's a scene that I certainly hope that I never see again in my career.
Eckert was taken to hospital where he died. Students remember him as kind and fair.
He was my math teacher when I went here, and he was a great teacher. Like, even when if kids were being not good, he'd get them in trouble, but he'd do it in a fun way.
In a town of 5,000, the loss is felt widely. Flags at half-mast. Many have put out their sneakers as a tribute.
Every loss is absolutely, horrendous, but I think it's just the magnitude, 5 people all, at the same time.
But the tragedy has also prompted people to show support and unity.
The people are quite distraught, very upset. They are coming together and urging putting together commemorations.
And Lisa, you're at the vigil for the victims tonight.
I am, Ian. There are hundreds of people here. They've been streaming in steadily before the sun even set, actually. People of all ages from the community, students of all grades, parents are here, community members too. They have all come together, and it is very clear from what we've seen that there is a lot of hurt, a lot of hugs, people supporting each other, clearly a lot of pain here tonight.
All right, Lisa Shing in Walkerton, thank you. Israeli attacks this weekend have killed dozens of people, according to Gaza health officials. Among the dead, 9 children, all from the same family. Israel's government says its target is Hamas, furiously rejecting a call from Canada and other allies to stop its offensive. But in Tel Aviv, as Tom Perry shows us, some want it to end.
They gather every week, the families of Israeli hostages and their supporters, demanding an end to the war in Gaza and a return of their loved ones. This week, some welcoming a message from Israel's allies.
It's a good step for ending the war.
Yehuda Cohen's son Nimrod was taken hostage on October 7th and remains in Gaza, one of 59 Israelis, living or dead, still held by Hamas. Cohen's hope that a joint declaration by Canada, the UK, and France is a sign countries are prepared to apply pressure on Israel's government.
The Western world pressing our government to go for a ceasefire, anything goes.
Dalia Kusnir's brother-in-law, Eitan Horn, is still being held hostage. To her, Canada and its partners have their priorities all wrong.
It's not understanding that when they condemning Israel, they're strengthening Hamas.
The Israeli government has faced months of domestic pressure to reach a permanent ceasefire, with critics of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu staging their own regular demonstrations. Some protesters doubtful any statement will stop the fighting.
I think it's rather performative. You know, it's just a way to make people in those countries think that the governments of those countries really care.
In Gaza, Israeli strikes continue. On Friday, an attack in Han Yunis killed 9 siblings, their mother a physician at a local hospital. The house was crushed like a can of sardines, says Ali Al-Najjar, the children's uncle. We looked through the rubble and called out names, but no one answered. The Israeli military says it's reviewing the strike in Han Yunis, but it's incidents like this that caused Canada, the UK, and France to issue their warning to the Israelis. The Israeli government now has a warning of its own, cautioning its citizens in Canada about what it calls an increased threat of terrorism against Israelis and Jews. Tom Perry, CBC News, Jerusalem.
On the same day Israel issued that warning, tens of thousands of Canadian Jews and supporters marched in the annual Walk for Israel event, including a survivor of the Hamas-led terrorist attack of October 7th, 2023.
Imagine when you run with your friends and you see people fall, people dying, people scream for help, and you can't help them.
Police say record-breaking numbers came out for the event in Toronto, roughly 56,000. A heavy police presence kept the limited number of counter-protesters at bay. A smaller event also took place in Vancouver. U.S. President Donald Trump says he's considering more sanctions on Russia after it launched its largest air assault on Ukraine since the start of the war. Aaron Collins shows us the devastating aftermath.
Ukraine's capital on fire. Again. The aftermath of one of the largest Russian aerial attacks of this conflict. On the ground, another terrifying night for Ukrainians.
Honestly, I don't think that anyone in Kyiv had any sleep this night. I personally spent this night under the stairs at home where we usually hide during such an attacks.
Local officials say roughly 370 drones and missiles were involved in the Russian assault, killing at least a dozen people, including children. Ukrainian forces fired back. But it wasn't just missiles exchanged by the two countries over the weekend. Ukrainian soldiers chant glory to Ukraine, some of the hundreds of prisoners released in a massive swap with Russia. This woman's father, one of the Ukrainian soldiers set free. I'm happy to see him again, she says, but worried about his wait after a year and a half in a Russian prison. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky speaking out over the weekend, urging the U.S. and EU to impose sanctions on Russia. After this weekend's attacks, some U.S. politicians echoing that call.
We can bring this war not just to a conclusion, but to a fair and just conclusion that will keep the Russians from invading countries in the future.
It's Memorial Day weekend here in the U.S. The president speaking to graduating cadets at West Point on Saturday.
And you will become officers in the greatest and most powerful army the world has ever known.
On his way back to Washington, not ruling out tougher sanctions on Russia.
He's killing a lot of people. I don't know what's wrong with him. What the hell happened to him, right? He's killing a lot of people. I'm not happy about that.
This weekend's Russian offensive, the third major one in just a week. Ukrainian forces responding with aerial attacks of their own. This conflict grinding on for more than 3 years, seemingly no closer to ending. Aaron Collins, CBC News,
Washington.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is asking Canadian health officials to spare an ostrich flock in British Columbia set to be killed because of bird flu. The U.S. Health Secretary is lending his support to a group of protesters trying to save 400 ostriches at a farm where avian flu was detected in 2 dead birds in December. In a letter to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, RFK Jr. asked officials to consider not culling the entire flock at Universal Ostrich Farm, saying there's value in studying the population. The agency says it's moving ahead, but hasn't given a timeline. It's been 5 years since George Floyd was murdered by a police officer on the streets of Minneapolis.
To black people, this is just the same old hundreds of years of history repeating itself.
What's changed since then and what hasn't? Next. Plus, the King is coming to Canada this week. What would you like to tell him?
The King, King Charles?
The King.
To speak up against you know who.
We'll open the national envelope. And later, a Grizzly play fight caught on camera.
They didn't even really notice there's people watching them.
Some BC Bear Cubs put on a show. We're back in 2. Australian authorities dropped supplies to farmers stranded by days of heavy rain and flooding. At least 5 people are dead. Thousands of homes destroyed, dozens of towns still cut off. At its peak, more than 50,000 people were isolated by submerged roads. Communities across the U.S. are marking a grim anniversary, 5 years since the murder of George Floyd. His killing sparked global protest and widespread calls for police reform. Tonight, Sarah Levitt is in Minneapolis, where some say change seems to be slipping away.
Every other day, Maestro King is here cleaning up, making sure the memorial to his friend George Floyd is well kept.
I just know we used to chat for hours. He was, I don't got much family, so he was somebody to talk to.
It was at this corner 5 years ago, now called George Floyd Square. Floyd was murdered by a police officer. For 9.5 minutes, Officer Derek Chauvin knelt on Floyd's neck. A bystander video showing his final moments saying, "I can't breathe," sparked a racial reckoning in Minneapolis and across the U.S.
It wasn't just a personal loss that we would be dealing with. As we know, George's death became the catalyst of this huge movement across the globe.
Find the defendant guilty.
In 2021, Chauvin was found guilty for multiple charges, including unintentional second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison. Police reforms and change were promised, but many say that hasn't happened.
To black people, this is just the same old hundreds of years of history repeating itself, and if we don't do something different, we'll just continue to repeat these cycles again and again and again.
According to an analysis by the New York Times, the number of people killed by police has risen every year since Floyd's death, though the number of those killed who were unarmed has decreased. And this week, another blow. The Trump administration moved to roll back federal reform efforts to investigate or oversee local police departments. In Floyd's hometown of Houston, family visited his burial site, dismayed by the timing of the announcement.
To wait to the anniversary and announce this, knowing this family was going to be brought back to the brokenheartedness of what happened, shows the disregard and insensitivity of this administration.
And Ian, that anger and that sadness still very palpable here in Minneapolis as well.
You're at a vigil, Sarah, not far from where Floyd was killed. Describe the atmosphere for us.
Well, you know, Ian, there's been a number of commemorations over the weekend. This morning there was a church service. There's an ongoing gospel concert and soon the candlelight vigil. It's an emotional time for the people here, but you know, many have come up to me over the day to say they vow to continue the fight for change in George Floyd's name.
Sarah Levitt in Minneapolis tonight. After being turned down for several loans, a BC man was shocked to discover his credit rating had been reset to 0.
Well, I was just stunned. I was like, what do you mean I don't have a credit? Like, are you kidding me?
The calls for national standards on credit score. Plus, King Charles is set to deliver the speech from the throne this week. Eli Glasner breaks down the symbolism, the protocol, and history. And the Canadian musician who played with music royalty.
He was just absolutely brilliant on so many levels.
Donna Grantis on her jam sessions with Prince. The National breaks down the stories shaping our world. Next. Tennis legend Rafael Nadal got a warm reception from fans at the French Open in Paris today. Organizers celebrated his legacy with a new courtside plaque bearing his name, his footprint, and 14, the record number of titles he won on that court. A BC man is going public tonight in a bid to restore his credit rating. That score suddenly reset, making it difficult to get a credit card or a loan. Rosa Marcatelli explains the little-known rule that allowed it to happen.
David Tregear says getting credit was never a problem until the rejections piled up. A car loan, credit cards, and more, all denied. He checked his Equifax account, shocked to see his credit score was reset to 0.
Well, I was just stunned. I was like, what do you mean I don't have a credit? Like, are you kidding me?
Credit scores help lenders decide if you're trustworthy with credit. Higher score, better access. Tregear complained to Equifax nothing worked. A big problem, he says, because many lenders rely on that credit bureau.
I've always had to call in and with no success.
He says Equifax wouldn't give him a clear answer until Go Public got involved. Only then did the credit bureau point to its little-known rule that says if an account is inactive, the consumer may be labeled unscorable, and that person's credit score dropped to 0. Tregear says it's true. He stopped using credit to avoid getting into debt, never thinking he'd be punished for it. Equifax now tells him the cutoff is 2 years, but won't say if that applies to everyone.
Turns out there are no rules on how bureaus should manage credit scores, allowing them to do what they want.
It's been crazy.
He turned to these consumer protection agencies for help, but didn't get any.
Everybody was just referring me back to somebody else.
TransUnion, Canada's other major credit bureau, says it doesn't reset scores. A consumer advocate wants Ottawa to set clear national standards rather than leaving oversight to provinces with a patchwork of regulations.
It tells me that there's a lack of common sense rules in place governing these two very important credit bureaus.
Equifax wouldn't talk specifics, instead sending a general statement, partly saying it prides itself on being a trusted steward of personal data. After hearing from Go Public, 2 provincial consumer protection agencies reached out to Tregear. One admitted it shouldn't have turned him away. But with Equifax's policy still in place, Tregear fears nothing will change. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
Go Public stories come from you. If you have a tip for the team to investigate, send an email to gopublic@cbc.ca. Now we go deeper into the stories that shape our world. The musician who got to play with Prince, she describes their first of many jams.
The chords, the melody, the solos, the tones, that kind of thing. That's really where my head was at.
And we have a question. What does the King need to know about Canada today?
I would hope the King would actually have a strong stance.
But first, decoding the speech from the throne, rituals. How that other King Charles got put in his place. Canada's system of government rests heavily on the symbols and traditions of the British Parliament and the Crown. Eli Glasner shows us how they clashed in a bid for power.
A message from Her Excellency the Governor General.
So here we are again, the speech from the throne.
Congratulations.
Together we move Canada forward.
Je suis heureuse d'ouvrir la première session.
And a ceremony stuffed with symbolism.
From Her Majesty.
It's really about the tension between Parliament and the monarchy.
Mr. Speaker.
All the more appropriate because for the opening of the 45th session of Parliament, the King himself will read the speech, as opposed to the Governor General, who typically represents the Crown. On the big day, all eyes are on the Usher of the Black Rod, a senior parliamentary protocol officer who plays a pivotal role, including inviting the MPs to the Senate to hear the speech. And that is where the drama begins.
Usher of the Black Rod is just getting close to the doors of the House of Commons. Those doors will be slammed shut in the face of the usher. And this is symbolic.
Incredibly rude.
Yes, it can be incredibly rude. It is the House of Commons demonstrating their independence from the crown.
At which point the usher knocks. Speech after speech, there's always been 3 knocks at the door. So what's with the closed doors and the knocking? Well, it goes back to the 17th century and a king who didn't respect the independence of the house.
During the 17th century, there was a major power struggle between the crown and parliament. During the reign of Charles I, Parliament felt that its rights were being circumscribed and that the king was acting arbitrarily.
And then in 1642, things really took a turn.
In the lead up to the English Civil War, Charles I brought soldiers and went into the floor of the then English House of Commons, seeking to arrest Oliver Cromwell, John Pym, and 3 other senior parliamentarians who, to the king, were threatening a civil war.
Which in part brought about the English Civil War and the execution of King Charles I.
Who rules England, a king or parliament? The Civil War decided the answer is Parliament.
Which brings us back to the Usher of the Black Rod, who as the Crown's representative must knock and request permission before entering the House of Commons.
The key point here is Black Rod cannot simply barge in and demand that the Commons come to hear the speech. Black Rod has to ask to be admitted, and the Commons have to agree that they will come.
Not all Black Rods are the same. The original was lost in the parliamentary fire of 1916. The replacement was snapped in half in 1967 and glued back together. After all the wear and tear, a new rod was restored as a gift for the Queen in 2016.
And that it is time for them to attend. And now
once the MPs follow the Usher of the Black Rod to the Senate, you may notice another object that's part of the procession, the mace.
Going back to medieval times, the mace was a weapon of war to defend initially the king, and then it became appropriated by the House of Commons.
The mace is important because it represents royal authority. The mace has to be present in the room for either house to conduct business.
We resume what day?
In fact, in the British Parliament during the Brexit debates, one MP put this to the test, grabbing the mace. He didn't get very far. With the royal robes and rods and maces, it might be tempting to see these traditions as relics from the past. But historians say, if anything, they're more relevant than ever.
At this particular time in the world, when democracy, legal rights are under challenge in many countries, I think it's very important for us to remember that we have these rights and why we have these rights, that people died to secure these rights for us, and that we should appreciate them.
With King Charles about to pay a visit, we put a question in the national envelope and then asked some Canadians for their answers.
What would you tell the king about Canada today? The king? King Charles?
The king.
To speak up against you know who.
It's gotten like you don't want to say his name almost.
Well, Canada's not for sale and will never be, right? I would hope the king would actually have a strong stance.
I don't think he's been here as king, ever. It'll be amazing for him to visit as king with Camilla.
Do you think the monarchy is still relevant in Canada today?
Outdated. It's outdated in the UK.
You know, part of their duties is not to be political, but I think they need to.
I think specifically he should say about keeping Canada as Canada. I hope he fights off the United States and the Orange Man.
Hi there. Hi. We are from CBC The National, and we saw your Canada's Not For Sale hat. Can we ask you a question?
Glad to talk. What would you tell the king about Canada today? So, confession, I'm a former Montrealer who lives in Philadelphia. I bought this thing to show off in Philadelphia. Canadians describe Canada as the wee country, and the United States is the me country, and that's very true.
In some ways, it's more united, especially surprisingly since the Trump's tariffs have started.
So I'm from Quebec. I feel that people doesn't very care about the kings coming in Canada. But yes, in the today's context, I think it's good to support Canada against Trump administration.
First time in my life we're feeling pride, or feeling unity as a nation, actually. Canadians are stepping into a space of identity, right? And owning that. It's beautiful.
Adrian has been looking into what it really means for a sitting monarch to deliver a speech from the throne outside of the UK. Now, we know that Charles isn't writing it. The speech is a government document, but it's also important that he keeps a straight face.
He does not get to have an opinion on it. That is the whole point of having a constitutional monarchy.
It's old hat for the royal family. The monarch does it every year in the United Kingdom.
My lords, pray be seated.
But outside the UK, now that's unusual.
Your Majesty looking radiant as usual.
Charles's mother, Queen Elizabeth II, only ever delivered it twice in Canada. First in 1957, Queen for only a few years at that point.
There was a very different sentiment towards the monarchy at that time that we can't ignore. So it was a really big deal in 1957.
And then she did it again in 1977 as part of a tour marking her 25 years on the throne.
The new generation fill me with confidence for what Canada can become.
Is a throne speech read by the monarch always just a ceremonial gesture? Well, the Queen did open Parliament in Grenada in the 1980s. It happened to be right after the island was invaded by the United States. Read into that what you will. And now the speech will be read here in Canada by a king for the first time ever. Why right now? Arguably, it might be about the Americans again, Donald Trump in particular.
Adrian will have more to say on that subject on Monday when she hosts live special coverage of King Charles' arrival in Canada. Starts at 12:30 Eastern. And on Tuesday, Rosemary Barton will lead our special coverage of the speech from the throne. On both nights, Adrian will host the National from the nation's capital. Coming up, the Canadian guitar virtuoso who played with Prince. Her stories of sharing the stage with a legend. And my interview with Donna Grantis is next. In fact, it will be renamed. Getting to rock with Prince, a dream come true.
He was just absolutely brilliant on so many levels.
How a Canadian musician learned she had the right stuff as a player and a songwriter.
And Prince and I traded solos. It was a really fun song to play live.
Prince died in 2016, but in his final years, he performed and recorded alongside Donna Grantis when she was part of the group Third Eye Girl. I sat down with her in Toronto, and she told me what it was like to play alongside a legend.
We used to play a really slowed down version of Let's Go Crazy.
Yeah.
So you might remember the recorded version of that.
Which is my favorite Prince song.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
And so our arrangement, the Third Eye Girl arrangement of it, we really slowed it down and made it kind of gritty. So it sounded like...
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. There's so much to talk about when it comes to Prince. A fantastic performer, very successful musician, but a lot of people describe him as a musical genius.
Absolutely.
As well. And from your perspective, as someone who played with him, who was in the studio with him, what does that mean, musical genius?
Oh, he was just absolutely brilliant on so many levels. You know, he was the greatest vocalist, producer, guitar player, songwriter, lyricist, bass player, drummer, keyboard player, entertainer. You know, whether we were performing in front of tens of thousands of people or just practicing, you know, the four of us on stage, he always gave 100%. And, you know, it was such an honor to be in his band and to just witness that musical genius.
I mean, you were inspired and blown away by him before you even met him.
Yes, of course.
Studying his music, studying how he played the guitar. And then one day you get an email, supposedly from somebody in his camp, inviting you to Minneapolis. What was that moment like?
Yeah, I didn't know if it was real or not because, like you said, you know, it was my dream to play with him and in his band, and I had been transcribing his solos and studying his live shows, you know, in the off chance that maybe one day I'd have the opportunity. And I received an email from Joshua Welton, the partner of Hannah, who played drums in Third Eye Girl. And he said, hey, would you like to visit Paisley Park and jam with Prince and his band?
You talked earlier about all the things that makes Prince a musical genius, and one of them is his writing ability, right?
Yeah.
His own songs, but also songs that became huge hits for other people.
Yeah.
But he took one of your songs and put it on an album. In fact, it was renamed. It was the name of the album. What's that like?
Incredible. So I had written an instrumental song called Electra. And he asked me one day if I would teach it to the band. Sure. And then he said, what do you think about if we, you know, call it Plectrum Electrum? I was like, cool, that's a cool name. And it became the title track to our Prince and Third Eye Girl album. I love that song because everybody, you know, had a moment to shine. You know, there were drum fills and, you know, Ida's bass just laid it down and Prince and I traded solos. It was a really fun song to play live.
Let's talk about some of those concerts. One of them here in Toronto.
Yes.
And Purple Rain, a song that's kind of maybe the most famous of Prince's songs, certainly a signature song, including a signature solo that he would play, guitar solo.
Yes.
Except not that night.
Not that night. And, you know, Prince always kept us on our toes during live performances. We always watched him to cue solos, breakdowns, you know, open up certain sections. But that night, it was a total surprise to me where, you know, after the third chorus, he sang, you know, in the purple, and then he pointed at me, which was the cue to take the solo. And I felt like that was a really special moment, and, you know, I consider that to be a gift to have had the chance to play that for a hometown audience.
What was he like?
You
know, like, so, you know, we see him on talk shows or on stage, but what was he like away from all of that?
He was very funny, very fun to be around, very curious, you know. We would often have, you know, band discussions about heavy topics. Like we would, you know, dive into, you know, religion and spirituality, and I felt like those conversations were always very open, very welcoming. You know, there were a lot of, there was a difference in views and in opinions, but we all talked for hours and really listened to each other, and those were really special conversations.
Was he a profound person to you? Did he say things that have stayed with you, that have inspired you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of the things that has really stuck with me over the years was we were all in the recording studio one day, and he came in and he said, "What if we could use music to teach?" And you know, we thought, well, that sounds cool. That's interesting, you know, but teach what? And then he said, he answered with a question. What if we wore clothes that could teach? And I thought, okay, that's an interesting idea. And then just kind of left it there. But that has really inspired the direction for my next project. I'm working on an album that brings together incredible musicians and the voices and messages of climate leaders with sounds of nature. And I've been learning a lot, talking to ocean scientists and activists, and my goal is to add a musical frequency to their words.
Stay connected to nature. Find joy and appreciate life and remember what that feels like.
And so, is it overstating it? Maybe it is, to say that connects, that whole process connects to your experiences with Prince?
100%. 100%. Thinking about what he said, you know, that profound sort of statement of that day in the studio, I thought that exploring this coming together of music with climate activism is really exciting to me and really interesting.
When you think of what a huge superstar Prince was and how carefully he guarded his privacy, it just was so amazing to be able to sit down with somebody in Toronto, from Toronto, who has been in Prince's, you know, on stage, in his home, backstage, and just ask all these questions about what Prince was really like. Up next, a rare sight and playful fight.
We went down a logging road and just noticed somebody else stopped. We thought maybe it was the elk.
What a Vancouver Island photographer caught on camera in our moment. You are looking at two grizzly cubs on Vancouver Island, a rare sight. And these two are doing what many siblings do when their parents aren't looking. They're fighting. Callie Boyle, a local photographer, stumbled across the two play wrestling not far from the road, and from a safe distance, she caught all the action on camera. Tonight, their epic tussle is our moment.
The river made a bend, and all the people were just right there. Just right there, even.
We were just out for a drive down near like North Island. We go quite frequently, and I know the Grizzlies were there last year. We're out exploring, hoping to maybe see them. We went down a logging road and just noticed somebody else stopped. We thought maybe it was the elk. When I had zoomed in, I noticed it was the mom and her two cubs. The mom went behind a big tree and the cubs just started like tackling each other. I grabbed my camera right away. They were play fighting for like 15 minutes, tackling each other, and they didn't even really notice there's people watching them. Not many people see that very often. This is the first time I've seen the Grizzlies on the island, so it's kind of cool. Now I could show people like, look, they're around this area, and it was a really cool moment, and I was glad I had my camera.
Yeah, you hear so much about bears in British Columbia. I didn't realize that there are people who don't believe that there are grizzlies on Vancouver Island. So Callie, the photographer, as you heard there, says, like, not only are these particular pictures really cute, but they're proof, clearly, that sometimes there are grizzlies on the island. Thank you for being with us. You can watch anywhere, anytime on the free CBC News app and subscribe to the National's YouTube channel. I'm Ian Hannamansing in Vancouver. I hope you can join me weeknights, 7 Eastern on CBC News Network.